Peter Schiff Show.
Well, joining our program now is going to be Matt Staver, and Matt is the founder and chairman of the Liberty Council. He is also a radio talk show host. His 15-minute daily program, Faith and Freedom, is heard on over 400 stations throughout the United States, as well as a 60-second commentary, Freedom's Call, that he does. He's also authored 9 books. The most recent one, I believe, Faith and Freedom, a complete handbook for defending your religious rights. Matt, welcome to the Peter Schiff Show.
Good to be with you.
Hey, thanks for coming on. So we brought you on today to talk about this ongoing saga, or maybe not ongoing, maybe it's finally come to a conclusion. You can fill us in on that, of a 15-year-old girl who apparently, or you claim, was kidnapped by state authorities in Massachusetts and maybe like tortured as if she were some kind of a lab rat for about 16 months before finally being returned to her parents. Could you, I hadn't even heard about this, so can you kind of update my audience as to what happened to Justina, is that her name? And
yes, Justina Pelletier, and she's
Justina
the youngest. Yes, Justina Pelletier is the youngest of 4 daughters, sisters or siblings, and her mom and dad, Lou and Linda, have been married for many years. It's an intact family. They live in a very loving relationship with one another, and they're all very close. Well, back in January of 2013, if you work back that far, January 2013, Justina was attending private school. She was 14 years of age. She was a competitive figure skater. There's photographs of her competitively figure skating. She looks in good health. But she was being treated by the chief of metabolic services at Tufts Medical Center, which is a very reputable facility in Boston. And she was being treated.
She lives in Connecticut, right? She's in Connecticut?
Correct. She lives in Connecticut. She doesn't live in Massachusetts. But
what part of Connecticut is she?
Well, it's near the border of Massachusetts and Hartfield, area. Mm-hmm. But she was being treated by the very top person in the Tufts Medical Center for mitochondrial disease. And that's a condition in which your cells don't transmit energy as much. It's kind of like a brownout, if you will. So sometimes parts of your organs might be affected by it. Well, she was being treated and doing very well because obviously she was competitively figure skating. She was also being treated for, sometimes she had gastrointestinal issues by the chief of the pediatrics division, Dr. Flores. And so now, February of 2013, she develops a flu-like symptoms and has difficulty eating. So her treating physician recommends the family take her over to Boston Children's Hospital. Why? Well, it's just across town, and that's where Dr. Flores, who had now transferred from Tufts to Boston, is located to see her GI, who she had seen before. So they admitted her. They wanted to go directly to the GI floor, but instead they encountered a brand new doctor 7 months out of medical school from the Netherlands who disagreed with the diagnosis of mitochondrial disease, thought it was something else, and did not even look at the medical records or look at the have the opportunity to contact the treating physicians, and didn't even call in Dr. Flores, who was actually now at Boston Children's Hospital. Instead, called in a psychologist. The psychologist said, it's all in her head. It's a somatoform disorder. She's making it up. It's all in her head. There's nothing really wrong. Well, this particular psychologist had written an article saying 1 out of every 2 minors that have physical complaints, it's all in their head. So that's her MO. 50% of kids under 18, they really don't have anything physically wrong with them. It's all mental, and you ought to stop the medical treatment. It's all psychosomatic.
According to that, all psychosomatic. And based on seeing her once?
Based on seeing her for 25 minutes without even talking to the physicians who were treating, decided that it's all psychosomatic. So then gave the family a brand new treatment plan, 1 page. And in that 1 page it says, we're going to discontinue the medications, discontinue any medical treatment. You can't talk about medical conditions in the presence of your daughter, and you cannot seek a second opinion. Here, sign the bottom, and this is the direction we're going to go. And they said, well, what about Dr. Flores? Well, we're not going to call him in. We think it's all psychological. Well, thank you very much. They said, we'll check her out. We'll go back across town to Tufts where she was being treated. And that's when they called in the Department of Children and Families. And they told the Department of Children and Families, we think it's psychological and that she should not be treated medically. Therefore, to treat her medically is, quote, medical abuse. And therefore, they prevented the family from taking their daughter home. And that saga went on for 16 months. And she went from a competitive figure skater to being confined in a wheelchair because her health deteriorated so much under the custody of the Department of Children and Families.
Well, obviously, the medical condition or the psychological condition worsened. Maybe she was in so much stress psychologically from being separated from her parents. But obviously, that's not. So they kept her in this facility against the will of her parents, and they withheld any medicine that she had been taking prior to that point for an ailment that she had been diagnosed with from her family physician.
Yes, that's right. And they stopped the medications. They wouldn't let her doctor, who is the chief of metabolics. I mean, he's not some low-level doctor at Tufts Medical Center, which is a very reputable facility in the same town. They wouldn't let him come to see her. And they discontinued all the medical. And they would not bring in Dr. Flores, who now was actually at Boston Children's Hospital. That's why she went there in the first place.
Are they claiming, though, that whenever you bring a minor child to a hospital, that if you disagree with the diagnosis or if you want a second opinion from what the physician is diagnosing, that if you express your desire to do that, that they have the right to take your children from you?
Well, that's what Boston Children's Hospital MO apparently is, because this is not the first family that has encountered the same situation or very similar. In fact, the Boston Globe back in 2013 began to do an investigative story, and they found 5 other families that had the same kind of situation, one of which was diagnosed with mitochondrial disease, and they classified it to some psychological, and then others were classified psychological from other medical conditions that they were being treated for, and they took the kids away from the family. And in
now,
fact,
obviously, if the parents had just not said anything, had they simply said, okay, fine, and left, and then went right back to their other doctor, everything, they would have been able to do that. It was simply because they expressed what their intentions were, that somehow they used that as justification for taking their children away from them. And, at what point does a court get involved? I mean, wouldn't you need some kind of a court order in order to, separate a child from its parents, a minor child from its parents?
Yeah, you have a real problem in Massachusetts. You have Boston Children's Hospital, and it's different than Tufts because Tufts doesn't do this. Boston Children's Hospital has this penchant for finding things that are psychological, and it's partly because they're getting federal funds from the National Institutes of Health for research on psychological versus physical conditions, and this psychologist is one of the grant recipients of it. So that's number one. Number two, whenever they reclassify you, you either voluntarily become part of their subject for research, or if you refuse, they call in DCF and you become a ward of the state. And the policy says that wards of the state are subject to research, and so these become research labs. And then DCF just simply rubber stamps whatever Boston Children's Hospital does. And then when it goes to court, you're supposed to have a hearing within 72 hours when a child is taken. But in this case, Judge Johnston was very lax in his procedures. He didn't have a hearing for 2 months. So 2 months went by. She's in the custody of Boston Children's Hospital and the DCF, and nothing happens. Finally, when a hearing does happen, instead of 72 hours like the law says, 2 months later, the judge never issues an order, so never does anything. So he just continues.
But meanwhile, I mean, this is a 14-year-old girl. What was she in the 8th grade or 7th grade?
Yeah, and here's the other thing.
What happens to her schooling? I mean, is she having coursework? Is she just confined in a wheelchair in a hospital, or is she getting? Are there any teachers there?
That's right. She doesn't get any teachers. For 2 years, she had no education. So right now that she has been freed after we got involved, after 16 months, she now has lost 2 years of her schooling because in the semester of 2013 that began in January, February, she didn't complete that. She didn't go to school in the fall of 2013. She didn't go to the school in the spring.
She may not have had any psychological problems when she went into that hospital, but she probably has a whole bunch of them now that she's coming out almost 2 years later. I mean, what can that do to a girl? I mean, did she have any contact with her parents? Were they at least allowed to visit her?
Well, she had contact, but she only had 1 hour on Friday supervised with her family, and they weren't able to talk again about anything medical. That was part of the stipulation. You can't even talk about medical. So earlier this year,
supervised visitation, as if they had abused this little girl.
Right, and there was no evidence of it. In fact, the DCF never even did a home inspection. They never even contacted the private school where she was attending. They never interviewed the family. They never interviewed the 3 older sisters.
Well, it seems like the only abuse, right? The abuse was coming from the hospital because they separated her from her parents and her siblings, and they didn't give her, they withheld the medication that she needed to treat the disease that she had because they wanted to pretend that it was psychosomatic because they wanted to put her into their study. You know, it's an example of, when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. This guy with this big psychosomatic hammer sees this little girl as a nail that he wants to hammer down. I want to talk more. We got a break, and I want to talk about, what's going on now? I mean, are there lawsuits? I mean, are there ramifications? What's happening to this hospital? What kind of public outrage was there? What did you do? And what did your organization do? How did you get involved? And what role did you play in getting her out? I mean, might she still be there had you not stepped in? So we'll answer those questions after this break. So we'll be right back. We are speaking with Matt Staver. He is the founder and chairman of the Liberty Council, and we're talking about the near 2-year ordeal of the now 16-year-old Justina Pelletier. She spent almost 2 years confined, basically a prisoner of Boston Children's Hospital until she was finally released. Matt, when did she get out?
She got out a couple of weeks ago, just before the 4th of July weekend at the very end of June.
And what was involved to get her out?
It was a long ordeal. We got involved in late February in this case, and that's how it all came about. As we worked day and night and through the weekends, making legal arguments and meeting with the highest levels of people in Massachusetts government, including members of Congress and also members of the state legislature in Massachusetts. So it was a full court press to get her out. And
February is still pretty late, right? I mean, what had they done? It was over a year that she was confined in this hospital against the will of her parents. What was going on during all that time before you got involved?
Well, she was being confined. She was being brainwashed. They were telling her, if you just think you're going to be better, you're going to be better. So it's all in your head, and everyone agrees with that. And of course, that was not true. They were abusing her. They manipulated her. It was unbelievable. So what happened was, in February, her dad went on a national television program and talked about his daughter, and the Department of Children and Family wanted to hold him in contempt because in November of 2013, in contempt of what? In contempt of a verbal court statement in November of 2013, when the Boston Globe was doing their investigation, they called DCF and they wanted to silence them. So they asked the judge to put a gag order on the parents so they couldn't even talk to the media. So the judge did that verbally from the bench.
Whoa.
And so in February, he just couldn't. Yeah,
and there wasn't even a hearing on that gag order? They basically said, okay, the government's going to take your children away from you, and we're going to make it illegal for you to complain about it?
Yeah, you can't even speak to the media about your daughter. And they wanted to restrict them as to what they could even post on Facebook about their daughter. It's unbelievable. So then in February, he goes out on this radio program because he just can't stand it anymore. His daughter's health is deteriorating. She's headed towards death. And that's when we learned about it, and they came down on him with both feet. But 4 days after we got involved, the gag order was gone, the motion for contempt was gone, and we got them to agree to send her back to treatment at Tufts Medical Center. By this time, we had made a major push in the media, and they didn't like that, and we filed legal arguments that for the first time pushed them back. And they ultimately agreed that they would send her back to Tufts Medical Center, but then it took 3 weeks to get them to even begin to schedule an appointment. We had to file a motion for contempt against the Department of Children
and what
and
has
Families.
happened, apart from missing 2 years with her siblings and her parents and 2 years of schooling, what has happened to her untreated medical condition during that time?
Well, that's why she's gone from a competitive figure skater to someone who is confined to a wheelchair. And now she's going to need a lot of physical rehabilitation just to get her strength back. She's now being treated medically, thank God, at Tufts Medical Center, back with Dr. Mark Corson, the Chief of Metabolic Services at Tufts. And so eventually she'll start to recover, but it's going to be a long road. First of all, she needs to get the medical treatment. Secondly, she needs to get some rehabilitation to strengthen her body. And then thirdly, she's going to need to beef up on education. She's lost 2 years of education.
Yeah,
and then
what are these?
She's got a lot of
doctors?
Emotional issues.
Oh, no question about
emotional
that. But what
stress
are these doctors
that she faced?
What are the doctors that are now treating her? What do they say about the claim that it was all psychological, psychosomatic in her head? And what evidence, what testing did the Children's Hospital do to rule out that it was in fact a real medical condition and not something that she was just making up?
Well, the doctors at Tufts and anyone else who saw her outside of Boston Children's always thought from the very beginning, and including now, and they've even been more convinced that it's medically, not psychologically induced symptoms that she has. And as far as what they ruled out at Boston Children's, they didn't. In fact, the diagnosis of somatoform disorder, which is something that is psychosomatic, you have to rule out all of the conditions medical that causes this, so that there's no medical cause or no medical problem. And consequently, in order to do that, you have to look at all the diagnostic studies. And then at the end of it, somatoform disorder is a diagnosis by exclusion. I can't explain it medically, so it must be all in your head.
Yeah, it seems to me like, I'm not a doctor, but it's like the old saying, if you hear hoof prints, think horses, not zebras. When somebody comes in with a bunch of symptoms, you don't immediately conclude it's psychosomatic. You would have to rule everything out. You would have, if you cannot find a physical explanation, if you run all the tests and they all come up negative and there's no explanation, then maybe by process of elimination, you might conclude it must be psychosomatic. But how you can look at somebody, do no tests, and just jump to the conclusion that it's psychosomatic. How can they do that? How could there not be a massive lawsuit here? How can they not even just shut this whole children's hospital down?
Well, in fact, there needs to be. All those people who were responsible need to be held accountable, because it's not just the Pelletier family. As damaging as it has been to that family, it's other families as well that have been caught up in this. Boston Children's Hospital, Massachusetts DCF, Webb, and the court system has been incompetent and slow. They could rectify it, but they need judges that will actually do their work like they're supposed to.
Nobody should be taking any of their kids to this hospital. The bad publicity maybe would shut them down. But as far as I'm concerned, if what you're saying is true, the father would have been justified in enlisting the help of a private army, bring on some mercenaries to break his daughter out of that prison by at gunpoint.
Yeah, for any father or any parent, that would go through your mind. And I know talking with them, they said, certainly things like that went through their mind. But if they were to act like that, then the government would say, see, we told you. And they would never get their daughter back again. Frankly, if we had not intervened and if we had not come into the case late February, she'd still be in custody all the way up until she's age 18. And who knows whether she would have even survived until then. Probably not.
And then if she'd have died, they would have just said, well, it was all psychosomatic and she just never, she never came to terms with it. So she just willed herself to death, or it was all mental. That's what they would have claimed.
Yeah, that's exactly right. This is a problem that we have with this conflict of interest where Boston Children's Hospital gets these federal grants to study psychological conditions.
Matt, I hate to cut you off. It's a very interesting story. I very much appreciate what you did on behalf of this family, this little girl, and probably all of us who are battling every day against corruption in government at the state level, at the federal level. Everybody else, you've been listening to the Peter Schiff Show here at SchiffRadio.com, the gold standard in talk radio. Bye for now.